So the data center is where we house all of our lab server environment and also the infrastructure that it takes to run our campus network. We can do everything that we're doing here in the cloud, and we were doing that before, but I just saw an opportunity to where we could save on some cloud costs by hosting it ourselves. So the main goal was to pull our lab infrastructure out of the cloud hosting and host it on site where we can do it cheaper. On the rack, we've got some virtual host servers, so servers that are hosting other servers on them, running as VMs. And we've also got some network equipment. So we've got a firewall and some switches. And we have some battery backups that keep the equipment online in case of short blackouts, or even in the case of like power surges and things like that, it cleans up the power for them. And then we also have a NAS, a network attached storage, that houses some of the local data storage for the environment. It's a lot of planning, especially when you're building out something that's kind of new, whole cloth, something that you're having to create, and a lot of just planning ahead of what do I want, how much CPU do I need, how much memory do I need, how much do I need per lab resource, and then figuring out how I'm going to network it all together and all that sort of stuff. And then after planning it, then you have to go research, well, where am I going to buy it? What does the pricing look like? What's availability look like? And all that sort of stuff. And then after doing some research, then you have to submit a request for budget to get it purchased, and then wait for the purchase to go through, wait for the vendors to get the equipment in, and once they provide it to you, then you got to do the install. So there's a lot that goes into it, and it does take a little bit of time to build out something like this. Most of the work effort fell on me, but I did have support when it was needed. So in a few of the cases, testing out some new technology, I had another engineer just doing some testing with me. And when we went to make the purchase, the owner, Siobhan, went with me to the vendor that we were purchasing from, just so that we could get an introduction. And then I've had some help moving the equipment. I made the mistake of carrying one of these heavy servers upstairs by myself one time, and all it took was one time. So I've had help when I needed it. To be honest, it mostly did get built the way that I wanted. That's one of the benefits of planning, is that if you're meticulous about it, then you know kind of exactly how it's gonna play out. But in terms of building out an environment like this, if you are kind of developing something new, like a new part of the business or something like that, you're never really sure what all you're going to need. So when I was building it out, there were things that we added later because we didn't necessarily need them up front. For example, we were just trying to replace our labs in the cloud. So that's what we went for first, is what is the minimum stuff that we need in order to do that. So that was virtual servers and network equipment. Well, after that was here, and we had it in a working state, and we verified that everything worked the way that we wanted, then we started using it. Later down the road, we ran into some problems where we had power outages and things like that ended up corrupting a couple of hard drives, and had to rebuild the server a few times. And from that, we then added the battery backups in order to alleviate that problem. And then later on, we added the NAS to get some additional storage. And we did run into a few problems with the NAS. We had some issues with the hard drives were not seating correctly, and the NAS did not read them. It wasn't able to identify them. So that was something we had to work out with the vendor. But in general, those are just kind of normal things that you run into. So I wouldn't say that there were any major issues or anything like that. But even when there's not any major issues. We always expect there to be a few issues. So there's a local vendor that's actually right around a mile away from campus here, and their name is the Server Store. And what they do is they buy enterprise hardware from, really large companies, large organizations like Google and Facebook and places like that, and then they resell the hardware to, secondary market. And one of the really nice things about them is, one, that they're so close that I literally just drive over in my truck and pick up a server when I need it. But also they have a really good selection. They've got a large variety of different hardware vendors, and we can completely customize the hardware layout that we want. So I pick what CPU I want, how much memory I want, what hard drives I want in it, and all of that, and they get it all put together, and then I just have to go pick up a complete server. So really happy that the Server Store is so close to us here. Well, there's a big difference in cost. So what we were looking at was trying to reduce our Azure bill, and also that Azure bill in terms of cost was for usage that was very compartmentalized. So we would have a class that would be using a Azure resource for a week, and then it would be offline, and it wouldn't be back up again until the next class needed it. But even with only having it available for just a few weeks out of the year, the Azure bill for those services was about the same cost of what we built in the server room itself. So the hardware that we installed on-prem was about the equivalent of a year's worth of Azure bills for running the labs. But with it being on-prem, we can use it 24/7. So we're not just using it for limited amounts of time. And also next year, that hardware cost has already been spent, so we're saving on long-term cloud costs. When you're doing a build out like this, or any sort of plan like this, you do survey other vendors and see what their offerings are. So looking at pricing and specs and things like that. And we did look at some other stuff, like I looked at new pricing, and the difference in cost was, for everything that we built out, it was about the same cost as 1 year of Azure pricing. But for new equipment, it would have been about 10 years of pricing. So there's just a drastic difference in the pricing cost there. So I knew right away that we were going to be looking at used equipment. And after that, I just looked for reputable places nearby. You can buy this type of stuff on eBay and places like that, but I always feel better getting it from a company who has a mailing address that I can, show up to their door if I have a problem. So we use Proxmox for virtual hosting, and that's pretty much what's installed on almost all of them. We do have a couple of bare metal Windows domain controllers that are running 2019, but other than that, everything else is Proxmox, and then other software running inside Proxmox. We host two different lab environments. We have a networking lab called Network Tools and Technologies, and then we also have a pen testing lab, which is called Pen Test Scenarios. And in the networking lab, the students build out a small business network environment, and they just get the experience of building out that type of hardware, and it serves as just like a real environment. Like, they get to see how things are connected and all that sort of stuff. In the pen testing lab, the students do scenarios where they're trying to gain access to machines that are running inside a lab environment that's hosted on the servers. Right now we have capacity of about 100 concurrent students, and that really comes down to how we try and split up lab groups, and also comes down to just licensing for VPN access. If we haven't hit 100 yet in terms of concurrent connections, so we haven't had to increase our VPN capacity, but if we did go above 100, we would probably have to do a little bit to increase it. They connect through VPN, so it's just, over the internet through a VPN. They have a VPN client installed on their home computer, or whatever computer they're using. And we use Fortinet products for most of our networking equipment. So the VPN they use is FortiClient VPN, and we use MFA, so we use the FortiToken MFA for it. And it works really well, really easy to use. In networking tools and technologies, that's the networking lab. The students build out a small business network, and it is a group lab project. So they work together as a group, and it's a scenario, and in the scenario they are employees at a managed service provider, and then the instructor for the class is supposed to be the senior engineer at the managed service provider. So the instructor's there to help when they need help, but they're really there to do basically play work. Like they're there to build an environment just like they would if they were working at a job. So they're expected to do as much as they can on their own, but when they get in trouble or they get stuck on something or they need some help, there's usually a senior engineer or someone who's more senior in IT that they're able to reach out to for help at a real job. Well, that's the same sort of thing that we give them here with the instructors. So in the lab, they build out a small business environment. It's a network with a WAN, a LAN, a guest environment, and then a DMZ. And on the LAN side, they build out a Windows domain environment with a domain controller, an IIS server, and a Windows workstation. And then on the DMZ environment, they build out a LAMP web server where they actually build a wiki, and they add notes for their build out to that wiki that they create. And then they also publish that wiki so that it's available remotely from their home computer, so they can open it up in their home browser over the VPN, and they can see that they just built a website basically. And then on the DMZ, they also build out an FTP server, and they also have to build out the firewall that runs the environment. And we use a demo license of the FortiGate firewall that they build in, and they have to set up all the firewall rules and all that sort of stuff. So basically they just go through the entire process of what it takes to set up most of the basic resources that you'd see at a small business. So Windows domain, a file server, a web server, and the firewall. GNS3 is a open source software for labbing, and it's what we use. So we have a Proxmox virtual host, which is hosting our servers, and running on those virtual hosts are Ubuntu 2022 servers, so the latest version of Ubuntu. And then on the Ubuntu server, it's running GNS3 server, and that's what's actually hosting the lab environment. And our students can connect remotely over the VPN, and they see everything through the GNS3 application on their home computer, but everything that's actually happening is happening on the server itself. So it's a lab tool, and it's free and open source, and it's really useful for this type of thing. It's a great boon to have something like that. For the cloud stuff, probably not, just because it is, cloud stuff is all going to be about cloud-based things. So there's probably not going to be much that we're going to do on-prem that would really touch on the cloud side. But on the data science side, we might in the future have some hosting for databases and things like that, to just give students access to maybe larger data sets and things like that. We haven't made any strong decisions yet on that. We are building it out. So right now we have the two labs that I mentioned, NT&T and pen test scenarios. And those two labs are, they're really great, and students do get a lot out of them. But what I would like to see in the future is, instead of having two separate labs which are not connected to each other and are really run as like two separate classes, what we're planning to do in the future is to have one persistent lab that runs the entire length of the course, and that is a lab environment that the students are always using. So it's something, instead of something that they just come in and they do for a week or two at a time, instead it'll be the entire length of the course, and they'll be constantly adding to it and making changes and things like that. So the future for the data center is that it's going to grow larger and hopefully allow us to have an even better lab environment for future classes. I feel really good about it. It took a lot of work. It was a lot of effort, a lot of planning, and I'm really satisfied with the results. One of the things when it comes to this type of thing is that there's not always a good roadmap or anything like that. So there wasn't really any, I didn't have any examples of anyone doing this before. I'm sure it's been done, but there's just not any guides on how to do it. So it was an accomplishment, and I'm really satisfied with the results. It's worked out as good as I could have expected. There have not been any major problems, and it doesn't require a lot of maintenance, so I'm pretty happy. I just really like tech stuff. I really like finding a problem that is difficult to solve and then trying to figure out a way to solve it. So anytime there's something like, if someone can say, hey, I need this, and I can just go figure out how to get them that, I feel pretty happy about that type of thing. So that's kind of what motivates me, is when there's a problem to solve, I feel not just like a work ethic motivation, but like there's a personal motivation that I am challenged to solve it.